The Titanic, perhaps the most famous ship ever built, was known for its luxuriousness and its story. Built in Belfast, Ireland, the ship took workers from September 1908 to April 1912 to complete. On April 11th, it set off on its first voyage to New York. During the middle of the night of April 14th, in the North Atlantic Ocean, the ship struck an iceberg and began to sink. Only a very slim amount of passengers survived. There were approximately 706 survivors, or about 31.6% of the total amount of passengers on board. The Titanic was the first ship to use a very unique piece of equipment, the rotary spark discharger. The first rotary spark discharger, a device that represented a transition from the plain spark gap to a more refined method of transmission that would be realized with the later advent of continuous wave technology. The transmission, a part of the discharge, was a function mainly of the brute power of the spark discharge across an air gap in the length and height of the aerial. The rotary disc contained 16 contacts that spun at a high rate of speed opposite two stationary electrodes, allowing the spark to discharge hundreds of times a second whenever the telegraph key closed the circuit. The synchronization of these discharges resulted in a musical tone that carried through the atmosphere. Despite the fact that the aerial carried by both the Titanic and its sister ship Olympic were identical, due to the Titanic's newer version of the discharge, the range of the aerial was much farther. The Titanic was considered by many to be unsinkable because the ship was built so strongly that people thought that nothing on the planet could damage it. It did, however, sink, and all its believers were proven wrong. It was also considered by most people to be the last word in luxury, due to its extravagant interiors and furnishings. For example, a restaurant on board Café Parisien had French windows. Those were the first ever used on a ship. Other examples of unique luxuries were fresh cut flowers and heated saltwater pools. All the cafes had fancy seating made of fine woods and leather. The Titanic survivors were possibly the luckiest people in the world at the time. They actually witnessed the event and lived to tell about it. One of the survivors, Thomas Exenham, witnessed something that he described as one of the most horrific things he had ever seen. He said that a man who went by the name of John Astor refused to give up his seat on the remaining lifeboat to a woman and her baby. An elderly man got out of his seat and gave it to the woman and baby. Oxenham later said that the old man's bravery caused him to cry. Astor eventually died because his lifeboat flooded and sank. Unfortunately, the